And some of it was a distraction, but most of it was having opportunities and taking advantage of a lifestyle and a freedom that our parents and our grandparents never, ever dreamed of. Well, may have dreamed of. And so we, as the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, became the dreams of our ancestors. We were able to do things that our grandparents never even imagined. I remember one time, my grandmother, she lived to be 96 years old, same as my mother actually. And I was at the time, which I'll get to that story later, but I was at the time living in Europe. And one year I came home to visit, and of course went to visit my grandmother, still living in that same village in Western Pennsylvania. And I said, Grandma, when are you gonna come to Europe to visit me? When are you gonna come to London to visit me? And my grandmama said, well, baby, I'll come long as the Greyhound bus will carry me. And so imagination that I have, of course, I'm imagining this Greyhound bus, which I have taken many, many times, and many times with my grandmother, in the segregated back section of the bus down south. And I just had this vision of this Greyhound bus with the driver and the steering wheel with wings on it, and my grandmother in the window waving, you know. Just, very fun and very imaginative. But those were the kinds of memories that I had. She was an incredible woman. My great-grandmother, whom I did also meet, who remained in South Carolina until her death, who also lived to be 96. Seems to be the magic number, doesn't it? She was a midwife and actually birthed nearly every child born in Darlington County between 1890 and 1960.
Thank you so much for that sharing. That's really lovely. I really appreciate that. You see, we treasure those stories so much. You see, if I want to ask you, now you are telling me the story of your grandparent. We haven't moved more into yours. We are coming there just now. But I want to tempt you to see if it is possible to learn about your grandparents, talking about their own grandparent. Like, what did they tell you of their own infancy? When they were growing up as children, what did they recollect? What do we know about that?
Wow. Well, you have to understand that when I was a child, my father was nearly 60 years old. And when I was a teenager, when I was about 15 years old, my father was retirement age. So I have a couple of stories, well, one story in particular, but I will tell you, aside from knowing both my maternal and paternal grandmothers, I only knew my maternal grandfather because my paternal grandfather had already passed away by the time I was born, and my maternal great-grandmother. So I had personal experiences of them all. One of the very interesting stories is that my grandfather would never talk about his family. And after doing some research, I actually did find his relatives. My grandfather had 5 siblings, and all of the grandchildren of those siblings never knew that any of us existed. So we didn't know that each other existed, but we found one another. And snippets of stories have come out that there may have been some kind of terror that encouraged them all to leave South Carolina and scatter and never divulge the acknowledgement of each other or each other's whereabouts. And this is what we believe happened in my maternal grandfather's family, that there was a murder or some kind of a horrible thing that the entire family had to split up and run away from South Carolina, not divulging any information about their siblings for fear that they might be found. And so because of that, we never knew anything about my grandfather's family. One of my mother's sisters remembered, she told me this story before she passed away, that there was a man that came with a daughter and they stayed for 2 days, but my grandfather never explained who they were, but she remembered their names, and those names actually popped up in the family tree. So we are aware that there was a secret that prevented us from knowing one another. And it was very distressing for us to learn that we had this family for 100 years and never knew about one another.